Welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm John Dickerson. It's another week of pick your headache for President Obama. The U.S. and 5 other nations start talks with Iran this week, but the country remains defiant. Leaders deny claims they've been secretly enriching uranium, despite proof of a secret plant that does just that. Can diplomacy and increased sanctions really change Iranian behavior? In Afghanistan, the question of more troops lingers. General McChrystal, the commander there, wants them. The president says he's thinking, and Republicans say each day of delay makes the situation more dangerous. And there's no comfort on the home front as health care reform trudges through Congress. Here for our Start of the Week roundtable is CBS News Washington Bureau Chief Chris Isham. Chris, I want to start with a clip from General McChrystal talking about progress.
The question is not whether we're making progress. The question is whether we're making enough progress fast enough.
So the debate here in Washington from Republicans when they talk to the president is every day you delay has a real impact on the ground. And McChrystal seems to be saying a version of that, is that we've got to move quickly. What's your sense of that connection between those two?
Well, I think that this is a real problem at the moment because the military clearly feels some real pressure to start to change the dynamic on the battlefield. The Secretary of Defense has talked in terms of 12 to 18 months, that they've got to change the dynamic. I think there's a real sense that they don't have control of the battlefield, that the battlefield is controlling them, that the Taliban has the momentum, and that we are just simply not getting control of the battle space, and that we simply don't have the resources that we need to begin to change that dynamic. And that's what you have right now is, I think, a confrontation between the military leadership with McChrystal and on up to Chairman Mullen and to the Secretary of Defense saying, we need more resources, and the White House saying, we need to think about this, we need to deliberate.
And Secretary of State Clinton on Face the Nation said, you know, it takes a while for the troops to get there. They're just getting there. It seems like their posture is we've got to have a long think about this that might even go past, Secretary Gates said weeks, but the White House seems to suggest maybe even months.
Right. Well, General Jones, the National Security Advisor, told Bob Woodward over the weekend that there was no target date for a decision. So they basically have set up a series of meetings, or 5 meetings over the next few weeks, he said, to discuss this. And they're going back to first principles. They're now talking about what is the strategy and looking at the strategy, which they'd already announced back in March. So they're now really beginning to reassess where we are in terms of the fundamentals, not just in terms of the resources. And this is a deliberative process, and that's fine. But, of course, the way that's perceived by our allies and by our adversaries can be as dithering, and that's the problem here.
And you mentioned the allies. Lindsey Graham mentioned yesterday, again on Face the Nation, he said this is sending signal to NATO. We've always had difficulty getting NATO to buy in, and they've done a little bit more in Afghanistan than they were prepared to do. So this is sending a signal to them, hey, don't commit more than you may have otherwise committed, because you don't know where the president's going to end up.
That's right, and this war is much more unpopular in Europe than it is even here. Here you see roughly a split in the population, 50-50. In places like Europe and Italy, the UK less so, but Germany, this war is very unpopular. In many places, 75% of the population is outright against it.
I want to run one other clip from the 60 Minutes interview with McChrystal about his relationship with the president and how often he talks to him.
How often do you talk to the president?
I've talked to the president since I've been here once on a VTC.
Talked to him once in 70 days.
That's correct.
Can you imagine ever saying to the President of the United States, sir, we just can't do it?
Yes, I can. And if I felt that way, the day I feel that way, the day I'm sure I feel that way, I'll tell him that.
Chris, what's your reaction to that the two have only spoken once in 70 days?
Well, of course, it's extraordinary, and it's quite a contrast from George W. Bush, who spoke to Petraeus when he was commander in Iraq at least once a week, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, by video conferencing. So it's quite a contrast. It also raises again the question of whether or not this administration feels the urgency that the military leaders, the military commanders on the ground feel.
I want to switch to Iran now, a place where the administration is trying to create a sense of urgency on the one as opposed to in Afghanistan. What could Iran do on October 1st in these meetings that would signal that they hear the administration message, and do you think they'll do it?
Well, it'll be very interesting to see what the Iranians pull out of their hat. These guys are very good at playing games and making it appear as that they are cooperating when in fact they're not. They have got all sorts of tricks up their sleeves, and it'll be really interesting to see which one they pull out on this one. They know they're under pressure because even the Russians now have said that sanctions may be inevitable. That's a real signal because Russia, they could always count on Russia not to enforce and not to recommend hard sanctions. So I think they know that they've got to come up with something. My bet is that they'll invite in the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors, and they'll say, look, you can have a look at this new facility. You'll see we haven't introduced nuclear material. It's all very innocent. It's all for peaceful purposes. And, you know, they'll do a long tap dance around that. The problem here is that the Iranians, you know, they keep playing these games. They say they've shown us all their cards, and they're cooking up something over here in left field. And, you know, we'll never really have confidence that we're looking at a complete picture here.
President Obama ran on the idea that he could start a new kind of relationship with the Iranians and North Korea. And Secretary Clinton talked about a dual track. How much do you think the president has to show that he sort of has Iran's number in terms of recognizing the gamesmanship you're talking about when you have this meeting on Thursday that may be just for the Iranians an effort to kind of play these games, use the process to look like they're cooperating while, as you say, they're doing something over here? Does the president have to come forward and really make a strong statement to recognize that he recognizes what Iran is up to?
Yeah, I think he'll do that too. Look, I think the administration has realized that the engagement option is really not a live option with the Iranians, that you simply can't trust them on this kind of stuff, and that I think that you'll begin to see them. In fact, they already have begun to go full force on trying to get an international consensus behind hard sanctions. They feel they've got to go through the motions on the discussions and on the negotiations and show that they're doing so in good faith. But I think realistically, they don't really believe it's going to go anywhere, and they know that the next step has got to be towards tougher sanctions. The real problem is, I think, down the road, is what happens if the sanctions don't work.
Right.
So, you know, then you're looking at an Iran which increasingly is going down the road of acquiring a nuclear weapon, and Israel standing by and watching this happen. And that's something, I think, where we're headed towards what could be a very, very tricky situation by the end of the year.
We've got the Russians maybe on board on this idea. What about the Chinese?
You know, the Chinese have been very quiet. And the Chinese have an enormous amount of trade with Iran on oil and on other exports from China to Iran in terms of nuclear, not nuclear, but military technology and industrial technology, dams, big hydroelectric plants, major industrial projects. So China has a lot at stake in Iran economically. And so they've been very, very quiet. I don't know. Generally, the pattern has been that China follows Russia. We'll just have to see if that works out this time, and whether even the Russians are serious about getting on board with real sanctions.
Okay, Chris, thanks. Chris Isham, CBS News, Washington Bureau Chief. Also, U.S. senators are known for their decorum when dealing with each other, but during last week's negotiations over health care, some crankiness snuck in. Here are a few highlights from the Senate Finance Committee markup.
If there's anything which is clear, it's that the insurance industry is not running this markup, but is running certain people in this markup.
With all due respect, Senator, I don't know what amendment you're referring to.
I'm referring to your amendment.
Certainly not referring to my amendment.
I am.
Well, first of all, I don't need maternity care. And so requiring that to be in my insurance policy is something that I don't need and will make the policy more expensive.
If I could just interject once with my colleague, I think your mom probably did.
I pointed out a study that said that $100 billion. Mr. Chairman, let me just complete my thought here.
In about 1 minute, you'll complete your thought.
Mr. Chairman, I am not delaying. I'm making an extremely important point.
It's a very, very important point, but you're also delaying.
It's courteous if you don't interrupt somebody right in the middle of the sentence of an important point they're trying to make, which is...
Maybe it'd be good for all of us to take a deep breath.
Taking a deep breath, we finally have Matt Latimer, who had a front row seat as a speechwriter for President Bush. Now he's out with a tell-all book. His former colleagues don't like it, and they're firing back with some sharp comments. Matt, I want to start with those, which you've heard a lot, but from Dana Perino, the press secretary for the president, Ed Gillespie. Gillespie said a lot of people don't know who Matt Latimer is. A lot of us are going, who is this guy again? who's writing this book. Perino made you sound like you were in this for the money. What's your reaction to those?
Well, I'm not surprised, really. You know, I liked all those people. I worked with them in the White House. You know, they left the Republican Party, by all accounts, as a complete mess and disarray. It was a smoldering ruins in 2006 through 2008, and I saw how it happened, and they don't want that to be revealed to people.
They would say we had 2 wars. We had an economy that was going into the ditch. You know, we had a lot going on. So the party may have taken some knocks, but we were trying to govern.
Sure. Well, you know, my book is a look at all a conservatives' journey through Washington. You know, I was a fat kid with glasses, a political nerd in Michigan when I came out to Washington to try to advance the Reagan Revolution in my mind, and I went to Capitol Hill and the Pentagon and the White House, and my book chronicles that entire journey. And what I saw in the White House, I just told the facts, the truth as I saw it, and there's some good things and bad things, and I say nice things about President Bush and some things that might trouble people.
As a governing matter, as presidents go forward, Republican and Democrat, one of the principles that the Bush administration talked about is that you need to be able to give advice in private that's not going to get out there. It's one of the reasons they knocked back some congressional inquiries. With books like this being written, how do future presidents know that they're able to have conversations without an insider writing a book like this?
Well, you know, ever since there have been presidential aides, there have been books about their experiences with presidents. I think President Bush was smart enough to know that, I mean, even in his administration, there have been dozens of books written by people who worked with the president, and there'll be people who work for President Obama who will do the same thing. And I happen to believe, and I know CBS believes, that more information is better than less information.
If somebody is going to read this book, aside from some of the great inside detail that's been covered, and what should they come away with this book? Having read it, what should they come away with?
I think they should come away with what Washington is really like. And what I wanted to do is capture in a Washington uncensored sort of view of what the city really is like. And I talk a lot about the Senate in particular, which I think is interesting because you just played a clip about senators, and I actually worked for Senator Kyle, for example. But a lot of senators think that this is a last vestige of French aristocracy, and they walk around, all they need are powdered wigs. They walk around, you know, they get chauffeured around to their offices. Some of them have more than one office in one Capitol Hill building. I talk about a U.S. senator who had somebody on staff who carried her purse around Capitol Hill. I mean, that's not the kind of people that I think we want to elect. We want people to advance values and principles on both sides of the aisle.
Who did that in your experience while you were in the White House or on the Hill?
Who advanced those principles?
Yeah, and held on to them despite all of the other things going on.
Well, there are members of both parties who do that. I mean, in my own personal experience as a conservative, I worked for Senator Kyle, for example, and he's remained the same kind of person that he always has been, and I thought he was a person of great integrity and substance. President Bush, I mean, a nice thing I would say about President Bush is, you know, he never let Washington change him. He was exactly the same person that I met the first time I met him as he was the day I left.
One of the things your former colleagues have said is that famous line, you know, you'll never work in this town again. What's your feeling about that?
Well, you know, believe it or not, I know it's hard for people to believe this in Washington, but not everything is about your next career move and your next positioning. Sometimes you just have to tell the truth and see what happens.
Final thought. You came in and wrote about the surge. You were there when the Bush administration was trying to make that case. Imagine for us what might be happening. I realize it's another party, but in the Obama administration, as they think about how to sell whatever the next move is on Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to do. We wrote speech after speech after speech about Iraq and about the surge and about Afghanistan, and people stop listening to you after a while because you only have so many things that you can say. And the real danger that I think for the Obama administration is you can't beat people to complacency and to agreement with a speech and a talking point. You need to actually have a strategy. You need to stop thinking of speeches as, you know, as a substitute for a strategy, and you need to communicate with American people when you really have something important to say. And I don't think we're doing that a lot in Washington.
Okay, Matt Latimer, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching Washington Unplugged. Find us here every week at cbsnews.com at 12:30 p.m. I'm John Dickerson. Have a good day.